want to speak to, you could raise your Zoom hand and we'll see if we can get to it. There might not be time, but there might be as well, depending on numbers. Just some little things about the chat as well. If you're not used to the chat, so the Zoom functions, there's a few functions that you should be able to access. So the chat screen, Rhiannon's going to say hi in the chat now, just to let you know. And you can, for a start, you can just put in, can you tell us where you're zooming in from? So you can use the chat. There's also little preferences for how you're seeing the screen. So you can see the speaker talking, or you can see everybody, or you can see the presentation and the speakers. You can change. There are ways of changing the size of the presentation. Kia ora, Chris. Welcome from Te Whanganui Tara. And what else? Just in the chat, just be mindful of others. So please use the chat. This is for you as much as for anyone. And yeah, this is a party actually where I'm drinking my green tea. You might be drinking something else, but yeah, this is to educate, to motivate, and to maybe have fun. And just lastly, so Rhiannon is my colleague and she's going to look after you in the chat. So if you have any tech problems, if you're having trouble with sound or visuals or anything, just feel free to ask Rhiannon and she'll try and help you. So recording started. Just very briefly, just to talk about the flow tonight. So we've just done the protocols for the Zoom. We're going to do introductions soon. The first part of the session is going to be information. So it's helping share some information that Greenpeace has about the policy, about freshwater, about the select committee process. And then it's a bit more practical. So how to make a submission, what's involved. We're gonna just take a short amount of time just to talk about why we're doing it personally, because this is a very powerful way of adding impact to our personal submissions. And then actually the point of the session is also actually to make a submission. So at any time that you feel like you've got enough information, feel free to head off. But if you want to stay on at the end of the session, we're aiming to do a close by at least 8 o'clock, but we're going to stay on as long as it takes for you to make a submission if you need us to help you. We're going to be here 24 hours, aren't we? No. Rhiannon's looking at me. No way. And because I'm so good with the technology, I'm going to stop my share. So hopefully you can see my face and I can see some of your faces. Welcome everybody. Just to welcome you properly, tēnā koutou, welcome everybody. We are in the land of Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei here in the Greenpeace office in Auckland. The purpose of tonight is to protect our freshwater, and the way that we're doing that is by everybody here tonight making a personal statement, a personal recommendation to the government on their consideration for the freshwater policy. And we're going to help each other to do that as well. And so it's great to see so many people here together tonight. It's also a space for you to ask any questions. So if you have a block in the process to make a submission, this is your chance to ask any questions. First of all, just put a question in the chat, but there will be space later on during the presentations to speak as well. Just to do some introductions. My name, as I said, I'm Elliot. I am the online digital engagement specialist. I am the digital engagement specialist for Greenpeace, which basically means that I work online to help Greenpeace supporters to get involved with campaigns towards the goals of the campaign, to be able to win campaigns. And I'm going to pass it over to my colleagues. So, Rhiannon.
Kia ora, folks. My name's Rhiannon. I am also in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. I'm also from the Greenpeace team. I work on the communications team on freshwater and kind of drinking water and agriculture work that Greenpeace does, which is it's a really cool thing to be a part of, and a really cool thing to get up every day and kind of go to work and be like, okay, today I'm going to go and work on something that's going to protect fresh water, protect people's access to drinking water. So feel really privileged to get to do this, and super excited to meet you all and to have hopefully some great kōrero tonight around how we can all protect the fresh water that we depend on. So I will pass over to Will, who is going to introduce himself and then kind of.
Kia ora koutou. Fabulous to see everyone here today. My name is Will Appleby. I'm the freshwater campaigner at Greenpeace. So I lead our Greenpeace's freshwater campaign as part of our larger team that runs our campaigns on agriculture. Much like Rhiannon, it's a privilege to get up every day and work in a space where you feel like you're making progressive change in Aotearoa. I'm the only one of us three who is not in Tamaki Makaurau. I'm in Aotearoa, Christchurch. I've lived here most of my life, and which is why part of the reason why this particular issue is really important to me, because we've seen serious degradation of our freshwater in the Canterbury region. And it's really great to see so many of you all today that want to make a difference in that space as well. So as Rhiannon mentioned, we're next going to go into just a presentation around our freshwater protections, what they are, why they are important, some of the changes that are being proposed, and why it's really important that people speak out in opposition to those changes. So I'm just going to share my screen quickly. And of course, I'll take some breaks at various points to allow you to ask questions, but in the meantime, feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and I'll try to keep an eye on them and answer them along the way if that's in. So yes, freshwater protections. This is the big subject for tonight. The Resource Management, Freshwater and Other Matters Amendment Bill, and that's what we're all going to make a submission on. So firstly, why is freshwater protections important? So as many of you are probably aware, hence why you're with us tonight, the health of rivers and lakes, they have been declining for a long time. One of the policies that was put in place to address the increasing pollution and degradation of freshwater was a policy called Te Mana o Te Wai. So that's been around since 2014, and has recently made a top priority for decision making on freshwater. So Te Mana o Te Wai is a fantastic piece of policy because it puts in place its priorities that have to be considered when people want to use freshwater. This is quite often called the hierarchy of obligations. The hierarchy is as follows. Whenever someone wants to seek a consent for the use of freshwater, or when a regional council is considering an application for a consent, they have to apply this hierarchy of obligations. First and foremost, the health of the freshwater ecosystems has to be prioritised. That's the highest priority. The second is that the health of communities, and including access for communities to safe drinking water, that has to be prioritised next. And the third, and after those two priorities, everything else follows, including commercial business interests, cultural uses of water, social uses of water. That comes next after those first two priorities. So the thing to keep in mind, I guess, at the end of the day, the most important thing with the hierarchy of obligations is the health of fresh waters and the health of freshwater ecosystems and the health of communities and their access to clean water has to be prioritised before any kind of development or any kind of commercial use of freshwater can occur. So in 2020, the National Policy Statement for Freshwater was updated, and that requires regional councils to prioritise the protection of drinking water sources using that hierarchy of obligations. That national policy statement, it recognised that degraded waterways are not able to supply good quality water for drinking. In turn, it says that the health and well-being of freshwater is at the centre of all management decisions, or should be at the centre of all management decisions. The National Policy Statement 2020 on freshwater, this was part of a package of freshwater reforms, which was the intention was to stop further degradation of New Zealand's freshwater resources, to start making immediate improvements so that water quality is improved, materially improved within 5 years, and to reverse past damage so that we can bring New Zealand's freshwater resources, waterways, and ecosystems to a healthy state within a generation. All of this that we're talking about in terms of Te Mana o Te Wai, the inclusion of that in the National Policy Statement, that is the long-term goal of these protections is these set of principles here. So now, as you're all probably well aware, we have a new government, and that government wants to roll back freshwater protections. And that's the bill that we're going to talk about tonight. So in May, the government introduced this bill, and that bill will essentially get rid of the requirements to comply with Te Mana o Te Wai, the hierarchy of obligations. That means when someone is seeking a consent to use fresh water or when a regional council is considering a consent, they will no longer have to comply with that hierarchy of obligations. Doesn't mean that the hierarchy of obligations is completely disappearing, but it means that specifically around consent applications, they will no longer have to comply with it. This bill will also remove restrictions around intensive winter grazing. This is quite often referred to as mud farming. Many of you have probably seen the horrific images that have circulated both online and in the media over the last 4 or 5 years now. Regulations were put into place to try and improve practices in terms of winter grazing. But those regulations, most of them will be removed with this bill. One of the really concerning things about this bill is the Ministry for Environment has said that there is no real tangible evidence to prove that this bill will make the situation better, or at least there's no evidence to suggest that that resource consent applications have been materially impacted by the hierarchy of obligations, which kind of suggests that it's a solution looking for a problem. The government's made many statements around speeding up development and backing farmers. Well, you know, when you actually look at the advice from the Ministry for the Environment, and they're saying that there isn't really good evidence that shows that people seeking a consent are being impacted by the hierarchy of obligations, then it does kind of make you wonder, you know, what is the point of all this other than just to benefit commercial interest in development? The Department of Conservation as well, Dave said that it will in fact make freshwater quality worse if this bill goes ahead. So next we're going to talk a little bit about making submissions, but really quickly before I move on to the next section, if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand or you can drop them in the chat. Rhiannon and Elliot, if you've seen any pop into the chat that I've missed, if you could read them out, that would be really helpful. No?
No questions at the moment.
Questions in the
Cool.
chat so far, but if people have questions, it's a great time to ask.
We have a Zoom full of scholars. This is fantastic to hear. You obviously already know a lot about this already, which is great to hear, great to see. But of course, yeah, if there's any other questions that come up, feel free to pop them in the chat. So we've talked a bit about the bill. Now the question is, what can we do about it? So the bill is currently open for submissions, and submissions close on Sunday. This is why we're hosting this party tonight, because we want to make it as easy as possible for you to have your say on this bill, and to help us try to shut it down before it goes any further and the government rolls back those protections, which are sorely needed. They're not perfect, but they're better than the way things were before, and it's important that we keep these protections in place and improve on them. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you go about making a submission, and how the process works. But first, I'll touch on how a bill becomes law. Now, you don't need to know all of this to make a submission. It's not hugely relevant to what we're talking about tonight, but I just kind of want to point out what step we are in the process in terms of when a bill is introduced and when it becomes law. So earlier this year, this bill, the Resource Management, Freshwater and Other Matters Amendment Bill, very boring name, but it is what it is. So that was introduced to the House. When a bill is introduced to the House of Representatives, where all the MPs sit, they get a chance to read the bill, they have a debate, and then they vote on the bill. This is what's called the first reading. It's the first reading of the bill, which they then take a vote. If that vote passes, which for this one it has, it moves on to the select committee phase. So this is where the bill gets sent to a select committee, which is a smaller group of MPs. We've got 120 MPs, give or take, depending on electoral circumstances. Let's not get into that. But give or take, 120 MPs in the House of Representatives. A select committee is a selection of up to 10 MPs, give or take. And these select committees, they look closer at the bill, they scrutinise the bill, and they hear submissions from members of the public, from businesses, from NGOs like Greenpeace. They'll take submissions from government departments, but most importantly from members of the public, which is you. At the end of the select committee process, they prepare a report on the bill, and that report gets sent back to the House of Representatives. That report might include some recommendations. It might propose some amendments to the bill, and that's based upon the submissions they've received and the scrutiny they'll give them. At that point, it goes to the second reading. That's where the politicians debate that report, and they vote on any of the amendments that might have been suggested. If the vote, they take a vote, and if they have a majority vote at the second reading, it then goes to the committee of the whole House, and that's where every MP in the House will debate various parts of the bill in various details. Individual MPs might propose changes, and those individual changes will be voted on as they come up. That's the committee of the whole House. It's kind of like a select committee, but it's just those 120 people, those 120 MPs, and they don't take submissions from the public. Once the committee of the whole House is finished, it goes to the third reading, which is the final debate and the final vote. And once if it passes its third and final vote, then it's sent to the Governor General. It's signed, it's given a stamp, and then it becomes an act of Parliament. It's no longer a bill, it's now an act of Parliament, and it's law. Now, the piece that we're most interested in today is the select committee. So this is where the bill is at the moment, and they are currently taking submissions from the public, and those submissions, if I haven't mentioned it already, close on Sunday. The select committee in question, it's the primary production select committee. This is a little bit unusual. Normally, bills like this, when it's concerning the Resource Management Act and it's concerning the environment, should actually be sent to the Environment Select Committee. It's unusual for it to go to the primary production committee. It's not generally their wheelhouse, so to speak, but that is where it's being sent to. So there's 7 MPs on this committee. It is the majority of the MPs are government MPs. That's very common. That almost always happens in any parliament. The select committees are generally proportional to the seats in the House. So it's quite often you'll have a majority of government MPs on the select committee. But that doesn't necessarily say that we can't influence them. So as I said before, the select committee, they scrutinise the bill, they take submissions. That includes written submissions, which is what we're going to do tonight, and oral submissions. So anyone that sends in a written submission, you can choose at the time whether you want to make an oral submission, in which case you actually get to appear in front of the select committee and tell them what you think about this bill. Thanks to digital technology, you can do oral submissions actually on Zoom these days. So you don't even have to be in Wellington to make an oral submission to the select committee. They don't always, they don't call everyone up for an oral submission, but quite often if you put your name down and you want to do an oral submission, quite often they will, ask you to appear in front of them. But it might depend on how many submissions they get.
Well,
Yes.
got a couple of questions in the chat around specifics on the bill.
Oh yeah.
Just
yes.
Kind of go into making submissions. Might be good to just touch on some of those.
Cool. Okay. I'll take a look. So Amanda had, is there any other activities as well as intensive winter grazing that will not need to follow a hierarchy of obligations on freshwater under the bill? So essentially any activity that's a good question, Amanda. Essentially any activity where someone wants to use freshwater or someone wants to make apply for a resource consent to use freshwater, this will apply to any of those examples. So intensive winter grazing, that's a specific proposal in the bill to repeal the regulations that were brought in to improve intensive winter grazing practices. That's one of the proposals in the bill. The main proposal that we're talking about tonight is the hierarchy of obligations, and that applies to all uses of freshwater. So essentially in practice, any use of fresh water on farms, any use of fresh water in polluting industries of any kind of development that might impact fresh water, all of those uses of fresh water under the Resource Management Act at the moment have to comply with the hierarchy of obligations, which means that freshwater ecosystems comes first, the health of communities and their access to safe drinking water comes second, and then all other uses of fresh water come third. Doesn't matter whether it's farming, industrial processing, development that might impact waterways or wetlands or anything like that. They all have to comply with that hierarchy of obligations. And what that bill does is mean that compliance will no longer apply. That means anyone making a resource consent will not have to demonstrate anymore that they're prioritising freshwater ecosystems and the health of communities. And it will mean that regional councils, when they're granting a consent, they also don't have to ensure that resource consent is complying against that hierarchy. Chris Lane asked, as I read the bill, consenting authorities and applicants will not even be allowed to consider water quality in the consent process. Have I read that right? That is correct. Yes, yes. So if I read that question correctly, yeah, consenting authorities, and in most cases the regional councils, yes, okay, no, I read it correctly. Regional councils, the consenting authorities you mentioned, and applicants, right now they have to comply and show that they're complying with the hierarchy of obligations. And you specifically mentioned water quality, and that would come under those first two obligations or priorities in the hierarchy. And what this bill will mean is consenting authorities and applicants won't need to show that they're complying with that hierarchy of obligations.
Yeah.
Cool.
John Blinko speaking.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. I should just declare that I worked with David Parker in the Labor and Labor-led governments for 5 or 6 years as an advisor, and so I'm kind of know this stuff because I lived it for about 6 years, and of course it's now being overturned. I think the reference in that question is probably to clauses 22 to 22 and 23 of the bill, which basically says the MPS-FM, its sole objective is that hierarchy of obligations, which happens to be the same as the hierarchy in Te Mana or Te Wai. And these clauses are what I call hear no evil, see no evil provisions. A consent authority is not allowed to consider them and is not allowed to ask for any information about them. So it basically says ignore the key objective of the MPS-FM, which is to prioritise the health of the water, human health, before commercial activities. It's appalling. And the reason they're doing it, by the way, the reason they're doing it now is that they are proposing to replace this the current MPS-FM, the one that we put in place in 2020, with the one that suits agricultural and commercial interests better and will undoubtedly lead to even further degradation of fresh water. And this is a holding action so that to prevent consent authorities applying the current law in the meantime until they get round to chucking out the current MPS, which will probably be about 18 months or 2 years' time, unless we can slow them down.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. And I can certainly attest to John's expertise on this matter. So I thank you for jumping in there and providing some further context. And as John said, it is appalling what is being essentially proposed in this bill. It is tearing away much of the protections that we currently have in place.
And the added irony, as I've well said before, is that the concept of Te Mana or Te Wai, which is parallel to the objective of the MPS, was originally introduced into a previous version of the MPS by a national-led government in 2014. In 2020, we spelled out what that meant after extensive consultation, including with Tangata Whenua and iwi. And now basically the current government wants to turn back the clock. Even on their own, even on what they themselves were starting to do 10 years ago.
There's a couple of more questions in here, so I'm just going to quickly run through the ones that are currently in here, and then we'll move on to the next section, just so we don't run out of time. So will extra weight be given by the committee if we want to support our written submission verbally? I think that's certainly the case. It shows that not only are you willing to sit down and put some consideration into writing a submission to the committee, but by then actually taking the next step to go there and say it to their face, basically, and to I think it does apply added pressure onto politicians to consider what it is that you're saying. Does the public get to see the select committee's report to the House? They do. So once the report has been published, once the report has been completed and delivered to the House, it's published on Parliament's website, so everyone can see what's in it. MPs are obliged to consider all submissions that are taken in, and then they write their report accordingly. But they're not. They're obliged to hear what people have to say and to put that into their report. And they're obliged to say, that there's an overwhelming show of opposition to this bill. The select committee is obliged to put that into their report, and that it be reported accurately. The recommendations that go to the House, that is the consideration of the MPs at the end of the day. That's it on that select committee. As John very well articulated, this is just a temporary measure before they move on to further reforms of the Resource Management Act. And this is why it's really important now to show opposition. And this is submissions are a really powerful way, especially personal submissions are a really powerful way to demonstrate opposition to a piece of legislation, because it shows the MPs that you actually care about it, you've put thought into it, and it makes it harder for them to ignore, essentially. So the main points to make in the bill, we want to be making on the bill is that it should be thrown out in its entirety. We want to tell the committee why you care about this bill. If you have personal stories that you can, or personal anecdotes, or to include in the submission, you absolutely should. If there are specific aspects of the bill that you're concerned about, you should certainly tell them. Rhiannon's just dropped in some really useful links into the comments, into the Zoom chat, to help you kind of get a starting point. You can of course copy and paste those suggestions into the submission form on the website, but we highly encourage you to try and write your own. Try to write it in your own language, using your own personal experiences if you have any related to this issue. Personal submissions are always really powerful. The select committees, they do tend to recognise if they get many submissions that all look the same, and do look like they've been copy and pasted. Of course, if that's what you're comfortable doing, it's the best thing you can, at the very least, the best thing you can do is to send a submission. But if you can make it personal, write it in your own language, write it in your own way, that goes the extra mile. So before we go on to just walk through the process for making a submission, is there any final questions that haven't come up already? No. Cool. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'll just step through quickly how to make a submission. So you should see the link in the Zoom chat to Parliament's website, which you see the name of the bill at the top there. A short description on the proposals within the bill. Down the bottom, you'll see, I am ready to make a submission. It's super easy. When making a submission, there's a really helpful form on their website. So you want to submit as an individual. Of course, if you are submitting on behalf of an organisation, you'd like to say that, you can say that you're submitting on behalf of an organisation, but that would need to be your own organisation. You'd need to have permission from that organisation to do so. Maybe you represent a community group or another NGO, and you're making a submission on their behalf. But for most of you tonight, you'll be submitting as an individual. Greenpeace is we're making our own submission as an organisation. So for most of you tonight, you'll be submitting as an individual. And of course, if you want to make an oral submission to the committee, you can indicate there saying yes or no. You certainly don't have to, but if you want to go for extra marks, I certainly encourage you to do so. And they're not as nerve-wracking as you might think they are as well. They're actually they're normally quite well. I've never had any bad experiences making a oral submission. So, but just for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm just going to click no. Put in your contact details. What's my name? My name's Will Appleby. And I'm going to go, what's my email address? Freddie@savefreddie.org.nz. We love Freddie. Of course, you want to put in your own email address there. And then when you click next, there's a couple options here. You can upload your own submission as a Word document or something like that. But the easiest way to do it is to scroll down here to use the form. And you can add your comments in this form, the comments you want to make on the bill, and any recommendations that you'd like to make on the bill. If you're like me, you probably don't have many recommendations other than that this bill should not go ahead in its entirety. So the recommendations section might be quite straightforward, but all of your comments are that you want to make on the bill, those things that we've kind of outlined tonight, and that useful information that we've linked in the Zoom call. Look it up here. And then we click next. I'm not going to click next because I'm not sure what happens on the next page, and I don't want to accidentally make this submission because that won't be helpful. And then I'll hand over to Elliot.
Very well, thank you. I'm just going to follow on from Will, so to pick up on the personal comments. So there's something really powerful about adding to your submission a personal comment or a personal motivation. And it can be a very simple thing, such as where you are based, or how old you are, if you're a mother, if you're a grandfather, if you're a student. It's just a personal identification, which actually connects. So sometimes we think politicians are machines, but actually they're people as well. And it's a way of making connection to the issue. And actually, the more submissions that are showing how important these things are to us personally, it adds weight to as a whole collectively. It also, some of the MPs on the select committee will also be supportive of our position, and so actually it's supporting them as well. I think also some of us might be policy experts in this Zoom room, but the idea is also that anybody can say can make a submission, so we don't need to be policy experts. I have made a lot of submissions on things that I care passionately about, and I haven't known all the ins and outs. I'm not a legal expert. I'm not really an expert in anything. I just know I know a little bit about a lot of things personally. So we're just going to do a little, we're going to spend a little bit of time. We're going to use the breakout function. It's a chance to have a short conversation. It'll be about 2 minutes for each person. Can you ask each other, what is your personal connection to this issue? Why did you come tonight? Why do you care about freshwater? Why do you care so much to take an hour out of your weeknight to learn about freshwater policy? And so just for example, it's just a very simple question. So, Will, could you tell me what is your personal motivation for making a submission about freshwater?
Yeah, so I think I might have actually started the Zoom tonight with part of my motivation. Yeah, so having grown up in Timaru originally, and I moved to Christchurch in 2009, so I've been in Canterbury for most of my life. The the commute between Timaru and Christchurch, you'd used to, it would mostly be sheep that would be on the pasture, and the odd beef cattle. And these days, it's mostly dairy cattle, and that intensification of land use has significantly degraded our freshwater in Canterbury. Some of the rivers that I used to swim in, you can't swim in anymore. There's increasing concern in our community about nitrates. In fact, my sister asked me about a month ago, we're looking at a lifestyle block, do you have any advice? And I just said, make sure you get the water tested, because it could be dangerously high. There could be dangerously high levels of nitrates in your water. And that's a reality for those of us down on the ground here in Canterbury. So that's my biggest motivation for making a submission.
Oh, thanks, Will. I feel like asking you more questions, but that's generally if you can summarize that in your submission, that is you're going to have an amazing submission. Well, it's also something that can come out later in the oral submission as well. It also adds power to oral submissions. So Rhiannon is going to put us into breakout rooms. There'll be 3 or 4 people. We're going to give you 7 minutes, and yeah, you might be an expert. You know what you're going to say in your submission already, but if you could help someone else to articulate what we're thinking and how to express it, then that's going to help us all as a group as well. We're going to keep the main room open. If for any reason you want to leave the breakout room, just you have that. You can come back into the main room as well. Okay. What is your motivation? Rhiannon is going to